Once again, in a recent video, I had mentioned the political spectrum and how out of whack it is, how it doesn't make any sense. It's not a spectrum. And I guess YouTube were listening and they suggested this video to me. Excuse me. Wildfires. This guy, Metatron, I don't recall ever seeing any of his videos, but apparently he has almost 1 million subscribers. And he asks the question, the perennial question was, um, Nazism right wing or left wing, and answer from history. Now, yeah, I guess you got to look into history to answer this question, see what Nazism was all about, right? You got to diagnose it properly. Or, as I take a sip of my coffee, in order to diagnose it properly, you got to identify what it was. Fair enough, but, well, let's get into it.
Was Nazism left-wing or right-wing? Well, believe it or not, this question gets asked around a lot, and there are several creators that provided answers. Well, the thing is that today's answer will be grounded on history and political science.
Postmodernism sneaking in already. There is no truth. The truth is relative, right? Sure, buddy. But he's going to provide an answer, right? That's the insinuation anyway. So many have failed.
But before we do that, let's talk about the question proper. This question is a form of ahistorical syllogism. You'll see several people giving you answers today in the comments down below. The same people will not watch this video and they will type either obviously was right-wing or of course it was left-wing. In my opinion, there are two major problems here. One, they use the American left-right dichotomy or political spectrum and they forcefully apply it to historical European.
So the American political spectrum is wrong?
Political regimes and ideologies. Hence, the first problem with the question proper is geographic or spatial in nature. Two, they use 21st century political spectra and juxtapose them over 20th century politics. Thus, the second problem.
So this is the postmodernism I'm talking about, right? There's no such thing as a political spectrum. It doesn't exist. It is whatever time and space, I guess, dictates it is. It is today in this geographical place, whatever we say it is, and it's something else somewhere else, right? The political spectrum doesn't exist. That's what he's saying. It's not. There's no truth in it, right? It has no truth value.
Problem is temporal. The incongruence between modern and 20th century political definitions within the right-left dichotomy is a complex phenomenon rooted in evolving socioeconomic shifting of global dynamics. Thus, this discrepancy necessitates.
Oh, so wordy and, eloquent, I guess, and content. So there's problems with the political spectrum. What are they?
Of a nuanced analysis of the factors that contribute to this divergence. Within these dynamics, the correct and coherent answer is going to be fractal, as there is no clean definition overlap. History is a multidimensional phenomenon. Expecting that.
Does anybody follow any of this? I mean, broadly, yeah, I get what he's saying, but I really don't mean to be rude, but it really just sounds like eloquent drivel.
Therefore, 21st century American political ideas to overlap neatly and perfectly with 20th century European political factions in order to come out with an answer is a flawed analytical method. So, the people.
But why? Why? Because I say so. Now, I understand that various political movements, ideologies, they won't necessarily fall neatly in this right wing or left wing category, right? Because they may have aspects of both, right? Or various, even competing political ideologies could both have elements of right wing and left wing ideologies. and it may not be very easy to say which is further left than the other. I get all that. There's this is a complex phenomenon. These ideologies themselves, these political movements are complex. They morph, they change. I get all that, but that doesn't mean that the political spectrum doesn't exist. Just because these, sorry, I'm coughing. There's just been crazy smoke for almost 2 weeks now due to wildfires, Antifa wildfires.
People who are categorically stating it was left-wing, it was right-wing, are not answering to present a comprehensive analysis of policies, ideologies, historical actions, military interventions, economic, religious and social positions pushed by said regimes. They are just insulting the other side. They are free to do it, of course, but just so we are clear about what those answers are.
Yeah, Nazism, communism have become cudgels to beat your political opposition with, right? Both the so-called left and the so-called right in the West, probably everywhere in the world, do this to each other, right? Just as I've been saying, the right in the United States has been attacking Antifa only to become Antifa themselves when it became convenient, right? Now they're the ones screaming, Nazi, kill the Nazi, right? Further showing you how really similar the so-called left and the so-called right truly are. They're both left-leaning, right? Both parties have leftists in their ranks.
Make no mistake, Nazi is a slur, and so people want to use it to identify and describe their political opponents. That is why, I would argue, it works as a conduit to the detriment of your political opposition when it comes to mass and public opinion. In this framework, fascism and Hitler currently have negative valence, they are derogatory, and with that established, the following coarsely represents.
Did he just say valence? Is he Spanish?
The train of thought leading to this usage. Nazi bad. We all agree with that? Okay. You Nazi. You bad. It's a simple process, really. Clearly doesn't require any deep empirical analysis grounded on historical political science, which is one of the reasons why the media uses the word constantly. Yeah, who would have thought the media's full of shit? You see,
Okay. So we're gonna get this nuanced, deep, whatever analysis now. Now we are.
once you take that leap, your historical vision will be irreversibly tainted. The question is flawed to begin with because its basis, namely the expectations and the prism of evaluation, are not in alignment. And on top of that, this has rendered the traditional unidimensional political spectrum increasingly inadequate for capturing the complexity of 20th century political parties. And
Wow, this is like it's pretty heavy, right? 124,000 people thereabouts saw this video. How many of them got through this whole thing or retained 20% of it? I wonder, right? I have a very difficult time following what it is he's saying. I get the gist, but it just seems like a lot of word salad.
and all of this reflects the ongoing evolution of political taxonomy. So, what do we do now? Well, to answer this correctly, first, we need to ensure objectivity to our analysis. Focus on attitudes
Incorrect. You have to first define what left and right are. That's the first step.
towards private property, individual freedom, and wealth redistribution patterns. If needed, even implementing a mathematical apparatus. Also, we should explore and take into consideration the political elite.
So it sounds to me like he's taking various political ideas that have a predetermined label attached to them, right? This is right wing, this is left wing, right? And whichever the political ideology that he's about to, Nazism, that he's about to analyze, if it has a certain number of these, then that makes it more right wing, and if it has these other left wing, so-called left wing ideas, then it makes it more left wing. But that's still not defining what that is. That's already assuming we all know what the definition is. But the problem is, well, we don't, because There's confusion whether Nazism was left-wing or right-wing. Why? Because nobody defines what any of this means.
Allegiances that occurred historically and the sort of opposition to the regime in question, the Nazis. So let's do that. Welcome to our comprehensive qualitative analysis. Some people will use nomenclature as a gotcha moment to place the Nazis within the political spectrum. In other words, Nazism stands for National Socialism, so they were
Okay, yeah, this is flawed. We don't need to listen to that.
Republic of Korea, Greek democracy.
Yeah, nothing democratic about North Korea. The name isn't necessarily honest, right? But that's the problem with politics and the political spectrum and political ideologies. They're rarely honest.
Which was a form of pure democracy, and then I compared whereby you had people saying, no, America, constitutional republic. Right, well, una repubblica democratica. Those right-wing populist
He is Latin, I guess.
movements that embrace economic
Political spectrum, here we go. Radical, liberal, moderate, conservative, reactionary. This is meaningless, right? Far left means they're radical. Okay. But, I mean, you could be on the right and be radical. Radical just means different from the norm, right? If I'm getting this correct. Just so outlandish, out there. You know, far right could be radical too. It is radical. It just means it's on the end of the spectrum. Radical, right? Liberal is left of center. Yeah, but you're not defining any of these. This is from the Encyclopedia Britannica, and it's absolutely meaningless. Moderate center. Yeah, that's just another way of saying center. Moderate, right? In between. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. Right of center means conservative. Yeah, but if we're conserving leftist ideology, then how are we right of center? Reactionary, far right. Yeah, these are not bad words to describe the political spectrum as it exists right now, whichever part of the world. It's just another word of right to say radical. Yeah, people that are considered far left today are also considered radical. But that still doesn't define what it means to be far left. It doesn't get to the core of what that is.
policies which in America would be associated with the left, while
The far left people, for example, well, they're reactionary too, right? Both sides are reacting to one another. It's a struggle. Politics is a struggle for power. One side reacts to the other, obviously, by default. So what?
at the same time promoting cultural and social conservatism. And on that note, since we're talking about what a party named itself, do you want to know
Conservatism. Like, okay, well, what's that? What is it?
what Hitler said when it comes to left or right? Well, Hitler denied that Nazism was either left-wing or right-wing. Instead, he officially portrayed Nazism as a, open quotes, syncretic movement. Yeah, let's ditch the whole name argument, shall we? So, what do I propose as an alternative? Well, personally,
This whole thing is just about names, nomenclature, but like no definition. But let's ditch the whole name argument.
I think that the best way to define Nazism is a
Here we go.
totalitarian dictatorship. That's going to be our basic core definition to identify what we are talking about, instead of using the American left-right spectrum. Then, after having established firmly what Nazism is, we can then look at the policies one by one and decide from an American contemporary perspective which of these lean right and which lean left, based on their salience. Alright, that sounds good on paper, but let's try if it works. What defines totalitarianism? Centralized authority, strength in the military, militarism with resources directed to domestic population, authoritarianism and dictatorial rule, repression of freedom of speech and freedom of the press, systematic elimination of political
Yeah, that's all fine and good, but when are you going to define what's left and what's right?
opposition by violence, expansionistic foreign policies, and conquest through military might. Already note that all three historical totalitarian regimes of the 20th century fit very neatly within this box: German Nazism, Italian fascism, and Soviet communism. In other words, when we examine the practical manifestations of these 20th century regimes, striking similarities emerge. For instance, the lack of individualism and individual.
So we're already, seems like we're just getting more confused. He's not adding any clarity to this. He's saying, well, this is totalitarianism, or this Nazism was this type of totalitarianism, and it has a lot of the same features as communism and fascism. Okay. I think we could have, you know, again, gotten some clarity if you actually define what it means to be left wing or right wing.
Freedom. Benito Mussolini himself publicly stated that fascism is anti-individualistic and accepts the individual only in as far as the interests coincide with those of the state. Well,
Okay, so we're getting somewhere right now, right? If it's anti-individual, then it's leftist. If it's pro-individual, it's right wing.
yeah, but then again, communism, fascism, and Nazism might be considered quite different when it comes to their core ideology. So, Metatron, are you really sure that they would fit each and every single one of these? Okay, let me prove it to you. Number one, centralized authority. Absolutely, all three. Strength in the military. Do I even need to?
Strong military has nothing to do with whether the regime is left or right. You could have a regime that supports the freedom of the individual and uses the strong military to defend its borders. So what?
Need to comment that?
And there's also, domestic policy versus foreign policy. You could have a right wing domestic policy and a left wing foreign policy. They don't have to be the same.
Militarism with resources directed to domestic population. Well, in the case of the Nazi, of course, that meant the Jews and it meant gypsies and every single person that opposed the Nazi regime. But when it comes to Stalin, well, he murdered.
Right? Just because you're racist or you discriminate against a group, that doesn't mean you're not right wing for when it comes to people like yourself. When it comes to the other, you could be left wing. As weird as that seems, I think that's correct. Could be.
More of his own people than he did of his foreign enemies. Just putting it out there. Authoritarianism and dictatorial rule, repression of freedom of speech. But what about the freedom of speech part? And are we sure? Well, let me prove it to you.
So that's all left wing, right?
Let's do a little thought exercise. You are in 1940s Germany. You disagree with Adolf Hitler's opinions, so you go to Berlin and in front of the whatever government building that they have there, you say, Hitler was an idiot. Yeah. Do you think you're going to survive that? And into the concentration camps you go. But what about Italian fascism? Well, you go to Rome and you state right in the main plaza. Let's teleport you to when it comes to totalitarianism. I might make a dedicated video to that. If you appreciate my contents on the extremes of that spectrum, it's the horseshoe effect.
I've seen this before. This is not a spectrum, right? This is just more confusion. When it comes to the political spectrum, right? That's the definition number 2. And it reads, used to classify something or suggest that it can be classified, right? It can be classified. If you're having so much difficulty classifying something, placing it on the spectrum, that you have to reinvent what the spectrum actually is, well, then you're not defining anything and you don't have a spectrum. It's like a vicious cycle. Or to suggest, reading again from the definition, that it can be classified in terms of its position on a scale between two extreme or opposite points, right? It's linear. It's a straight line with two opposite points, right? It's all in the name and how we define it, even though the definition isn't. We kind of have to infer right into it. It's left or it's right. Let's say you're in the center, liberalism, and you go left on this spectrum, you can't go very far. Or you go right, you can't go very far. All of a sudden, you have to go, well, south or down. And as you're supposedly moving away from the center, you're at the same time moving toward the other extreme, the left a little bit. This doesn't make any sense, right? This is in the spectrum. This is coming close to a loop, right? It's loopy. This has, like, just connect the bottom there, right? And you'll have everybody going in circles. And I think that's where we are, right? People on the right, they go so far right, supposedly right, right? They're really just leftists. You have terms such as alt-right, alternative of what's an alternate? What's alternative to the right? Well, left. Yeah, they were never right wing, right? They're leftists. This isn't a spectrum. There's no extremes here. It's bent, it's crooked, it's broken. They took a straight line and they bent it to a point where it's not quite broken. It still kind of functions, but basically they destroyed it. This doesn't make any sense. This isn't a spectrum. You can't just go left of center or right of center. You have to go down, and then as you're supposedly moving right, you're also moving left. This doesn't make any sense. It's stupid.
Extreme stuff.
They're bending the political spectrum to the whims of, I don't know, politicians or something like that, to the whims of what actually exists out there, because there's very little right wing. There are very few true right wing politicians in the world. Now, I'm not pro far right, but insofar as the political ideologies that I know of, the furthest right that I could think of is libertarianism. And it's not even on the spectrum, because this is in the spectrum, right? And when you look at the spectrum, it's dominated by left-wing ideologies. It's anti-freedom, right? You have a little bit of freedom in the center, and so that makes sense, I guess. But the more to the right you move of the center, the more liberal it should be, and the further left you move from freedom, liberty, the more authoritarian and even totalitarian it should be, right? I would say a place like, without naming what it actually is, North Korea would probably be as far left as we've ever been, maybe, right? This isn't a spectrum. It's bent. It's crooked.
Touch, even if, ideologically, when compared with communism, fascism is indeed right-wing. You have authoritarian control. Both Hitler and Stalin established it. It was absolute centralized power. Propaganda and information control. I mean, the Nazis were quite famous for burning books.
Leftist. They're both leftist.
And a lot of those books were in fact communist books and socialist books, by the way. Terror and repression. And yes, mass executions were common on all of these regimes. Now, in Europe, conventionally,
So that's the problem, right? The political spectrum, in order to be valid, has to be universal. It doesn't, in order to be true, it has to stand the test of time. History shouldn't affect it. And geography shouldn't matter, right? Truth doesn't change depending on geographical location or place in history. The truth is what it is. It's the truth, right? This is a very postmodernist way of looking at the world, right? Truth is relative to time and place. That's you just invalidated the whole concept.
Nazism is generally considered to be a far-right ideology, also due to their allegiances with the fascists in Italy and their countering of Stalin, and communism, which is, of course, a left-wing extreme ideology. 22nd of June 1941 and the invasion of the Soviet Union should stand as a clear definition of that. Besides, under Hitler, the new...
So he seems to be stuck in this loop, right? These are, well, it's left wing or it's right wing because it's like those other left wing or right wing ideologies. Well, how do you know those ideologies are left wing or right wing? Oh, it's because they're like these other left wing or right wing ideologies. And you just keep going in circle and circle and circle, and you're never defining what that actually means. You, you have to have a definition that comes before any of these movements come into existence. Well, it could come after, technically, but it has to come first. Logically, it has to come first. You have to define what these things are and then place these ideologies on this spectrum based on how they fit the definition. But he doesn't have a definition. He just says, well, this is left wing because it's like those other left wings. How do you know that was left wing? Because it's like what the left wing, he's stuck in a loop. He's going in circles, right? That horseshoe is, he hasn't quite closed it yet. I guess nobody has because, well, maybe that might help them realize just how full of shit that everybody is, right? It's not a spectrum. It's a fucking loop. It's that, famous snake or dragon consuming itself.
The newspapers of the Social Democratic parties are banned, functionaries are arrested, and whatnot. But once you start to look at this from the American political perspective, then the situation becomes muddy, if you will, necessitating a more
Yeah, my point exactly.
nuanced item-by-item approach. You see, the Nazis, for example, had nationalized health.
So the way you solve all this confusion and muddiness is by delving deeper into the details. I'm not sure I agree with that.
Government was deeply involved in every aspect of industry, so we're talking about big government. The Nazis were not in favor of free market capitalists, and yes, I'll defend this one in the next section. And all of this sounds left of center to an American. So
it's like he's on the right track in many instances, but he never fully defines what left wing or right wing actually are. He has some idea, it seems, but not a coherent definition, or at least not one that he's aware of.
it is mixed. On the following section, I'm going to present the characteristics of the regime, and then you decide where it leans the most towards. This way, we can promote critical thinking. Now, Nazism was characterized by extreme nationalism, state-funded welfare programs. If there were any form of identity politics similar to contemporary political discourse, of course, the Nazis would have been against it, but so would have been the communists. They had state control of industries, support for a strong military, and as we said, repression of freedom of speech. All right, now
That's all very leftist.
let's jump into the economic policies. A central idea of communist ideology was opposition to private ownership of the means of production, which blended with economic intervention within the private and public sectors. Now, to that, Nazism was different up to a certain extent. Let me clarify. Their overall economic approach favored big business and opposed labor unions, which of course doesn't make it sound socialist by any means. But we also have to remember a very important factor to this. In Hitler's speeches from 1920s, he
Yeah, but just because it's anti-socialist, that doesn't mean it's not a different version of left wing, right? Now he seems to equate left wing with, or far left with socialism, but that's not what left wing is. Left wing has its own definition that socialism falls under because of, you know, totalitarianism, government control, centralized power, the power of the state over the individual, things of that nature.
he clearly established his idea of what National Socialism was going to be. And mind you, it was only for Germans. And as he outlined his party program, he stated, open quote, that nationalization appears to me to be wrong, close quote. So, at least in the 1930s, he was sort of in favor of the idea of maintaining private property. But was he? Well, I do have an opinion on that, but let me quote a sociologist and economist of the period. Check this out. Friedrich Pollock says, open quote, I agree that the legal institution of private ownership was maintained and that many attributes characteristic for National Socialism begin to manifest themselves, albeit still vaguely in non-totalitarian countries. But does this mean that the function of private ownership did not change? I believe it reaches far more deeply and should be described as the destruction of all the essential traits of private ownership. And I would like to underline that this specific economist saying the private ownership actually wasn't a thing is left-wing. He was a left-wing economist. Moreover, in 1934, Hitler clearly established the fact that to him, wealth was for the national social state, not for the individual. And yes, the individual could enjoy some of that wealth, but it's thanks to the state. And in 1942, when he was in power, he stated, open quotes, the land was national property, and in the end, it's only given to the individual as a loan. Does that sound like private property
So it's all leftist.
to you? There is more to it. In 1937, Hitler had already established the fact that he would demand private industries to produce something that the state defined as being necessary. And they had two options. They either do it, which is great, or they don't, in which case the state will take control of that specific industry sector. It's not big government, that's massive government. All right, but if that's the case, if this is what Hitler believed, and by the way, this is confirmed by SS letters, even all the way up to 1944, that was exactly his position, and we can see in the way he acted. But if that was the case, then why did he not say private property is abolished? I mean, the Soviets did it. Why did he say, no, private property is still a thing? Well, he said that because it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter that legally there was still a definition for private property as long as what he gets is what he gets. And besides, of course, he understood that in a moment of war, you can't fight outside and also fight inside with the private sector. So he made the statement, private property stays, but then they control all of it, including demand, production, means of production, prices, everything. The government tells you what to produce, who to
Very left wing.
buy from, and what prices you sell. In other words, at least from an economic standpoint, in the discussion of private property, this was socialism disguised as capitalism. Now, of course, when you compare it to the Soviet Union, that had a complete centrally planned economy, this doesn't sound as extreme. But then again, the Soviets had a main goal, which was to increase the military power of the state. Sounds familiar? All right, now I would like to dedicate a small section to race, because of course this was not only a connection, so race and racism was a connection to, I want to say, Nazi ideology, but it was also a congenital element within the system. And another thing that the Nazis did was to put the blame of many of society's problems, particularly of the Germans, to migration. Moreover, apart from the Holocaust, there was clearly a sort of differential treatment under the law based on your racial affiliation. Now, this is of course real. It happened, and we can.
Okay, I have a feeling I know where this is going. It's going to be somehow right wing. Yeah, but it's not. This is left wing. This is still trampling on the individual, the rights of, well, a group of people, sure, but by that same token, individuals. Just because some people in the regime, blonde hair, blue eyed Germans, were preferred to, let's say the Jews, that doesn't mean that neither the domestic or foreign or domestic policy, just because the domestic policy was applied differently to the domestic or external population, that doesn't mean any of it was right wing. Just because some of it was, I don't know, less leftist or something like that, that doesn't mean that it was right wing. And yeah, if anything, the treatment of uh, genuine Germans, Germain Germans, I guess. That's funny. Um, was actually less leftist than the treatment of the Jews. But I have a feeling he's going to say that that was the way he treated other races was more right wing.
We can see some of these themes, particularly the ultra-nationalistic ones, in modern-day far-right ideologies. With that being said, let's also remember that if you think...
So being racist is far right because far right ideologies are racist. You see the loop? Define what far right is first. Define it. He he doesn't have any basis for it. It's just a tautology, right? It's far right because it's far right.
think that racism denotes right-wing position, then you would classify Karl Marx as a right-winger. And the reason I say that is because if you actually read the article he published in 1844 called On the Jewish Question, you would...
And this is where fallacies get you, right? You start not making any sense.
Absolutely considered to be racist. And also Marx didn't really like Mexicans. That's another thing that he did. And Friedrich Engels said...
Oh, he's probably Mexican, isn't he? Like, who would know this? Why? A Mexican might.
quite a lot of horrible things about black people too. Now I would like to talk about an argument that is the one that shocks me the most, and it's the claim that Hitler was a Christian. Now, of course, I'm going to debunk this.
So I'm confused. Was his racism far right or leftist?
I'm going to do it by, quoting from Hitler's own words with his own letters, and then we're going to look at how he changed his rhetoric before and after he became chancellor and then dictator. But before we do all of that, let me just say this. Do you really think that the leader of the most anti-Semitic regime the world has ever seen would have worshipped Jesus of Nazareth? Now, given one of the things that people say when they underline this idea that, well, Hitler was a Christian, is that they say that he was baptized as a Catholic. But I'd like to underline that not all Christian religions consider baptism or perform baptism the same way. I mean,
To answer his question, yeah, I think he might. It's not impossible.
differently from, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, the Catholics baptize you when you are a baby. So it's not like Hitler had any say to it. If that alone, the idea of being baptized within the Catholic Church, is enough for you to say, well, Hitler was a Christian, that you should consider Stalin a Christian, since he actually went to seminary. It was...
Well, all religions are infiltrated by intelligence agencies, I believe, and all states, to various degrees, use religion for political goals. Right? Religion. Someone got upset in the recent video I made that I said that religion is about control. What the fuck do you think the Ten Commandments are, for example? Right? It's about controlling your behavior. Like, why is this so upsetting? And if I had to put Christianity on this spectrum, the only political spectrum, the true political spectrum, I probably put it a little bit left of center, right?
Orthodox, but still. Hitler's real intent towards the church was eroding
Christianity. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's various types of Christianity, but yeah.
the core doctrines of the Christian religion until there was virtually nothing left of its original function, in order to slowly substitute it with a puppet used for social control, which would also have followed with the confiscation of all the places of worship, something actually quite similar to what is happening today in China. So that alone doesn't really make me feel confident about, Hitler's Christian beliefs. Oh, and the fact that he shot quite a lot of Polish priests dead. There is that. You see, during the beginning of his political career, Hitler publicly expressed favorable opinions towards traditional Christian ideas. That's true. But later he abandoned them. Most historians agree that he was adversarial towards organized Christianity. Oh, and he also criticized atheism, so he had a bone to pick with everyone.
So I don't know about all religions, but Christianity, there's Christianity for mass consumption, and then there is um, the occult, the hidden version of Christianity, right? Maybe that's a topic for another video, and I'm no expert on these matters anyway. But you get as a regular churchgoer, you get the watered down, uh, dumbed down version, and the adepts, the people in the know, higher up in the church or synagogue or whatever, they have a different version, right? Someone commented on one of my videos saying that somewhere in the Bible, I'm just going to trust that what he says is true. It says that Lucifer is the ruler of the world or whatever, something like it gives props to Lucifer, right? Well, yeah, he he's Prometheus, right? He brought people lucid fair, right? Lucid fair. He was the light bringer. He brought light to the people. Light meaning, knowledge, progress, enlightenment. So that's why some Catholic mass will sing songs, psalms or whatever, praising Lucifer, right? But in popular religious parlance, I guess you would say, Lucifer is Satan, which is weird because, well, it's a different name, isn't it? Right? So the, you know, quote unquote dumb folks on the ground are told one thing and the truth is different. And it's right there in their faces. But because they don't speak Latin, they just repeat the verses, not even knowing what they're saying in many instances. It is what it is, right? So, in other words, Hitler, the little bit that I know of him is that he was into the occult, right? The hidden um, meaning of religion. So if he didn't like or exterminated priests or whatever, or he was sometimes was anti-religion, well, that's because he was probably an adept or he was into the occult. And yeah, just, had a different idea about who God is, what true religion is, and you know, maybe initially he was Christian, but then became um, privy to the secrets of, let's say, the Catholic Church, the Vatican, right? The Vatican supported Hitler, helped a lot of the Nazis escape. But, as he became more in tune with what was taught behind closed doors in, let's say, the Catholic Church or Protestant Church, whatever, he moved more in that direction and didn't care so much about the sheep priests who maybe weren't into the true Christianity as he saw it, right? So, I mean, that's why maybe ostensibly he had a nuanced position, or it looks like he had a nuanced position on Christianity, when in reality, maybe he was pro, I don't even know if you want to call that true Christianity. I'm no expert, but he was more into the occult than the popular version of Christianity, right?
everyone. Now, if you examine some of his early talks, you'll see that he considered himself as a German Christian. He said, I'm not a Catholic, I'm a German Christian, and even a member of positive Christianity. Not member, but like a supporter of positive Christianity. But you see, positive Christianity is not even Christianity, as they rejected fundamental core doctrines of Christianity, such as the, divinity of Jesus. So, yeah, not Christians. And when it comes to German Christians, it was a type of Protestant church or group that supported Nazi ideologies. That's why he said that. Thus, in Hitler's eyes, Hitler detested Christian ethics. He said it was fit for slaves. And in 1937, he publicly said that the Christian church or Christianity was ripe for destruction. And that doesn't sound like a Christian to me. So, the idea that Hitler was a Christian is nonsense, and his ostentatious hatred towards Christianity wouldn't really work or go very well with, say,
Ostentatious. Well, I thought I was gonna learn a new word, but ostensible, ostentatious. Oh, okay, ostentatious. It's probably getting Spanish and English mixed up. Anyway,
modern day faith and flag right wing Americans. With all being said, as you can see, there are many aspects to this. Yes, some of his policies were in fact right wing, others would have been left wing. If you were to take like one of the
I don't think there was much in the way of right wing policies that he presented. Everything he said was just left wing, right?
those quizzes online, what you could do is try with your own, with your own understanding of these, you could try it and answer. Like every time you get a question, you could ask your question, what would Hitler respond to that, and try to do it. And you'll see that sometimes you'll go right, sometimes you go left. Therefore, Nazism should not be judged by whatever words Hitler crafted, and it should not be considered neither left nor right wing, at least in the political sense. The only thing in which Hitler believed was accumulating personal power. And we have a name for that: totalitarianism.
Yeah, totalitarianism is a leftist ideology, right? It pushes state power over the individual, right? Politics is the struggle for power in any geographical area, let's say. And the less the more power you take away from the individual, right? You need an apparatus to be able to do that. And that apparatus, as things stand right now, tends to be the state, right? Whether that's going to be AI in the future or whatever have you, some kind of global control system, right? We're going to be little human batteries like in the Matrix, right? For the time being, that's the state. So politics, logically, is the struggle between the state and the individual. Thus, the political spectrum has to reflect that, right? The more power the individual has, the less power is usurped by the state. The more power the state has, the less power the individual will have, right? Politics is struggle for power. And in society, struggling, the more power any one individual gets, right, the less power other individuals have, right? The more power any group of people get, the less power for any other group, thus individuals. So it's always a struggle between government and the individual, struggle for power. The more power given to the individual, the more right wing you are, the more liberty the individual has, the more right wing this is. And this is very radical in the world, right? That's, but I guess that's leftist because it's radical. And the status quo, at least insofar as history, right? Things that are on record, the world has always been more left leaning. Now, whether you, you couldn't just be, I guess you could be left wing in name, but if you didn't have the apparatus to implement the policies, right, then maybe like here in Ecuador, I would say it's more left leaning, but because there's not a very good apparatus. So in the ideology, right, on paper it's left leaning, but because the state doesn't have the type of apparatus to be able to enforce all these laws and rules, right? De facto, it's actually pretty right wing. I won't go as far as to say libertarian, but I mean, for example, like I could hook my neighbor up with the electricity, right? The electricity I get from a private company, I could just hook them up. I don't have to fill out any paperwork. I don't have to ask any permission. I could just do it, right? I don't have a driver's license. My motorcycle is barely legal, and I go wherever I want to go, and I'm fine for the most part, right? I could avoid trouble. I'm not supposed to be doing this, so I don't have this freedom on paper, but in reality, I do, right? So on paper, insofar as recorded history, the world has always been more left wing, right? But because the apparatus wasn't always there to enforce all the laws and rules, there were large swaths, and still are, of the world where it's, even up to a free for all many places, right? It's even libertarian in many places. So, yeah. And it seems to me with technology, we're moving in the direction of not just left wing on paper, but actually having the means to be able to enforce uh, the left wing ideology, something that rulers, power hungry bitches, have always yearned for. They finally are on the brink of having the apparatus to be able to employ total control, totalitarianism, right? And so Metatron over here asked the question, was Nazism right wing or left wing? And he said he was going to answer this question, right? But because he never defined what that actually means and only helped to confuse the conversation, right? That's why he just kind of threw his hands up in the air and said, it's neither, even though he gave you, right? Had he defined what that actually means and had the correct definition, he would have realized that just about everything he said about Nazism was left wing. But because he didn't, his conclusion was, well, I don't know. Yeah, we know you don't know because you don't know what left wing means. You don't know what right wing means. That's why, even though you give us this long spiel, very eloquent, presentation with tons of jump cuts, nice lighting, good production, background music, slides, and I'm going to trust correct historical perspective or little historical trivia. At the end of the day, he threw his hands up in the air and said, I don't know. It's neither, right? But this exposes the problem with the political spectrum. If you have a political ideology that you're not able to place on this spectrum anywhere, well, then perhaps the spectrum isn't a spectrum because it doesn't encompass all political ideologies, or you don't know what the spectrum is. You don't know how to define either extremes of the spectrum, which is why you're unable to place this political ideology anywhere on the spectrum. And I think for him, it's both. He doesn't know what it means to be left wing or right wing. He has some idea, but he doesn't know. He doesn't understand it, which means he doesn't know what the true political spectrum is. And that's why he accepts all these various different postmodern, just this postmodern idea of truth. It doesn't really exist. And that's why he can't get to the bottom of anything. And it's just like, I'm not saying there's like no value in the video, but that's why it's just this drivel. It doesn't get you anywhere. He sets out to answer a question, and at the end of this 20-minute long video, he just throws his hands up in the air and says, yeah, it's not important. He criticizes people for not being able to answer this question, makes a long ass video with tons of research, hours spent on the computer editing this shit just to finally be able to say, well, I promised you an answer, but I'm not going to give you one. It's just, and like tens of thousands, more than 100,000. By the time it's all said and done, it could even be a million. A million people will have seen this and walked away thinking, what? I don't know. Exactly that, right? I don't know. Nobody knows. We just don't know. Way to keep everybody deaf, dumb, and blind while, you know, ostensibly looking like, a genius, an intellectual, a very intelligent man, well learned, expert of sorts, right? An expert. Clowns people for not being able to give an answer, presents himself as an expert who will delve deeply into this nuanced question and answer. And at the very end of the video, he's just like everybody else, right? But hey, he wasted a lot of everybody's time getting to this point. So kudos, right? This is the only difference between the people he criticizes and himself is that there's a whole bunch of fucking word salad. Whereas people who don't engage in any of this, perhaps because it doesn't, on some level, they realize it makes no sense to, because it's all fucking drivel, it's all stupid, it's incoherent, it doesn't make any sense. Everybody's fucking confused. Instead of engaging in it, they just say, fuck that. It was right wing, it was left wing. Let me move on with my day, do something else. This guy, right, has spent tons of time and money educating himself in order to be able to come to the same fucking conclusion. Not even any kind of conclusion. So even less clarity. Now, granted, some of those people are just wrong, but like 50% of them are right. Most people actually, from what I've heard, I would venture a guess that most people would call Nazism left wing, which would be correct. However, they get there, they got it, right? They got it. And then a smaller percentage gets it wrong, right? You don't even have an answer, and you're like, you present yourself as this educated one who has more of an understanding. You're better than these people. You're going to be able to provide us with some clarity or whatever, and all you did is just fucking ramble. And at the end of the day, you didn't even give us an answer. Those people that you clowned, the majority of them, let's say 50% of them, were right. At least they were right, however they got there. you you didn't even attempt to give us an answer after you pretended that you had the tools necessary to get us there. And you're clowning those people. I just, but this is, this is content in YouTube. So long as you spend a lot of time, you know, arranging a shelf full of books in the background, and purple and pink light for some reason is like the way to go in the background. And, I don't know what the fuck you're wearing, bro, but I guess that helps. And you got the equipment, you got the editing, you got the jump cuts, you got good lighting. You just, you know you make it look clean and presentable and snappy. I i guess that's all it takes. It doesn't have to make any fucking sense. It doesn't have to get people close to the truth. Quite to the contrary, further away from the truth. It So long as it looks good, I guess people click. And this is where we are, ladies and gentlemen. A simple, very, very easy to answer question. Super easy, so long as you define what it is that you're talking about, and you start with true premises. It, it's unattainable to these people, and what dominates is, you know, the superfice, and that's what appeals to people. It's sad. It's a sad, fucked up way of, well, the way we are. the way we are. Anyway, fucking A. An hour. A fucking hour. That's all I gotta say. Yeah. The more power the individual has in any given political jurisdiction, the more right wing that places, and the more power the state has over the individual, the more left wing it is. Real simple, logical, clear cut, makes perfect sense, straight line, no horseshoe, no loopy circle, no broken line, none of that, right? Real straightforward, simple, gets you. The only reason why it took me a fucking hour is because I was responding to dribble, right? But I've told you guys, it takes 20 seconds to explain the political spectrum and place anybody somewhere on it somewhat correctly. Easy. Thanks for watching.